every community is on a spectrum, and every community is on a spectrum, every company is on a spectrum,
Right.
and we've got to come to grips with wherever we are on that spectrum, with the sole purpose of wherever we are on that spectrum, trying to improve.
That was Jeff Harrison, President and CEO of Citizens Energy Group, talking about how corporate executives can implement diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that benefit their organizations, their employees, and their communities. And this is IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on the 14th episode of the Freedom Forum podcast with myself, Angela B. Freeman. We are so excited to have you here. And before we get started, will you please tell our listeners a bit about you, your educational and professional background, and any other factors that led to you becoming a long-term corporate executive of one of Indiana's largest utilities, Citizens Energy Group?
Well, thank you very much, Angela, first of all, for having me here today. I sincerely appreciate it. And, I've got, I think, a common story that many have. I was born in Southern Indiana, so Hoosier.
Okay.
Been a Hoosier all my life, and born in Southern Indiana, come from a family of 6. From Jeffersonville, Indiana.
Yeah.
Father was a bricklayer back in the 60s and 70s, a little bit of a hard time back then for a Black man, but he made it. And then for the most part, grew up working for my father. It was as a hod carrier. So hod carrier does everything except lay the block or lay the brick. And did that in the summers with my father. Grew up and was a pretty good student. In school, played basketball, ran track, played football. And then my high school guidance counselor pulled me aside, and I was ranked fairly high in my class. I was around 33rd out of 500 or so. And she said, I think you could go to onto engineering school and go to Rose-Hulman. And I said, okay, but who is she? And so went on to Rose after my father and my guidance counselor, then with their encouragement, then finished up my degree after Jeffersonville High School, went on to Rose and got an electrical engineering degree, Bachelor of Science in Engineering. And then from there came to Indianapolis. And so have been here, made a family here. I've got 2 boys. One actually is a legacy, graduated from Rose-Hulman as well. He's working as a mechanical engineer. And then I've got another son who is at the University of Michigan, who's an industrial operations engineering major. So a lot going on, and just a little bit about me. Love Citizens Energy Group. I loved Indianapolis as well when I got out of school, and so have been here ever since.
So you clearly have a STEM background, and you may not appreciate, but I also am a biologist by training. So I've always said that STEM really gives you those analytical and critical thinking skills that helps you in any area. So I'd like to know what got you involved with electrical engineering specifically, particularly when you had worked as a bricklayer or with your dad as a bricklayer. So what kind of drove you to the STEM facets? And then when did you learn that you were truly interested in STEM? And more thankfully to that counselor, what convinced you that you'd have a real opportunity in STEM? Of course, the counselor indicated that, hey, you should go to Rose. But when was it that you really believed for yourself, okay, I can really make something happen with this degree?
Right. So I think, when I got started, I was young, always curious. And again, I think we all aspire to our parents. And so, my father was a bricklayer, so I wanted to be a bricklayer. My mother stayed home with us. My mom passed away very early on. So my father was really that role model for me. And so, but as I got more exposed and really from an educational standpoint, learned a lot about, at the time, the very early version of a computer. Yeah. And I very distinctly remember in high school when then it was only a keyboard and had that roll of paper. The millennials are going, what is he talking about right now? But it had a roll of paper out of the back of that keyboard, and it asked us a bunch of questions. What's your name a city, name an animal, and then this thing just took off by itself and started telling me, started typing a story out. And I thought that was the neatest thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And so that was the beginning. And then talking to my guidance counselor again, I took some electrical wiring courses, and
Sure.
so learned how to wire a house and wire breakers, and that fascinated me even more. I was already pretty good at math. And so that combination then is something that, again, my high school guidance counselor, who really, in this instance, it was an outside influence. And I think for many, especially Black families, that needs to happen in
Right.
order to, as many say, change your stars. And that really helped to change my stars. Her outside influence, she saw something in me. And then that combination then propelled me to go on to Rose-Hulman. And there was that constant interest that I had as I was going through school, forever being challenged. And then once I got out of Rose, I'll tell you the first thing I was able to do was, I think maybe because of my upbringing and my background, was really take very complex issues and distill them down into a manner that others could understand.
Right.
And that was something that I think helped me early on. And then I think leaders then saw that. Many leaders did not have, as you talked about, that technical foundation or background. And so they would like someone like me to come in and help explain things like that. And so that then propelled me to get my MBA, my master's in business administration from IU.
Yeah.
That combination of a technical background with a business mindset as well really has proven to be a great combination. I think it's even a great combination for young people, even today. From a leadership standpoint, again, I think others saw in me that I really just treated everyone the same and tried to do the right thing. There was some hard work. There was also some trial tribulations. There were people who would challenge me as my bosses would do that. I would meet that challenge and exceed it, and then you begin to get more trusted and more confidence placed on you, and then move up. So that's what happened.
You mentioned, again, I'm going to go back to your father being a bricklayer and your mother being a stay-at-home mother. My mom was a stay-at-home mom as well, so I can fully appreciate that. And certainly as you have transitioned into corporate leadership, I'm sure, you mentioned your mom passed away, and I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh,
but I'm sure your father is very proud of the fact that you've been able to ascend in the corporate environment. I know for myself that the role we currently play are roles that our parents never imagined we would be able to fill those roles. But unquestionably, although you and I have been very successful, there are challenges. You mentioned some trials and tribulations. And so I'd like to ask you specifically about being a diverse man in those business settings and corporate leadership roles, particularly in Indiana and Kentucky, and even across the world. Share with us some of those challenges that you experienced early on as you began to ascend up the food chain, and how you navigated those in a way that allowed you to continue to ascend in a way that put you on a platform for others to see, wow, that is possible, and you can make it all the way to the top. Tell us about some of the things you experienced.
Sure. And first I always start out by helping others understand I had no idea I was going to be a CEO someday. I mean, you don't start off, I did not at least start off that way. But I can tell you that for me, there were times that were pivotal moments in your career. And so, for example, as a young engineer, I was told by a supervisor that I would never even ascend to the level of supervisor. Yeah. And so you get upset, you get angry, you get mad, and then you have to do some self-reflection and ask yourself, is there something that is precluding me from ascending? And so you go back the next day and you go right to that person who said that to you and ask them, what do you believe would preclude me from rising at that point in time to the level of supervisor? And then you begin to work on those skills. So I think perseverance is one. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. It's just not, and I've got so many examples there that's just not the right psyche. We're able to do whatever we want. And then again, I think for me, at so many times in my career, there were so many friends and mentors and allies that helped me in so many ways. And it's one of those driving factors, I think, that helps me even today really participate even more in our community. I feel like I owe our community. I owe it. I have to pay it forward and do for others what was done for me when I was younger. But I think, again, for me as a minority Black man in here in the city, and as a CEO now, as I look back, it was those elements that really helped propel me and understand there was hard work. There was a presentation. When presentations would come up, I would study 24/7 for that presentation. I would go through my presentation, and then I would place myself in the audience as well, and then begin to ask myself, what questions could I ask the presenter myself, and then begin to really flesh out my presentation to, again, this primarily at the time white leadership team. This was when I worked for AES Indiana, what is now AES Indiana, and so I think that then those presentations really helped propel me. The leadership team at the time saw, again, that the technical skill, they saw the business side, and then again saw someone that they felt comfortable with, and they wanted around the table to help them understand and help them really simplify complex issues and problems down so that they could make a decision on that issue or problem. So those were some elements that helped me.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Being a person in STEM myself, I've done those presentations where, particularly in the technical fields, you're always presenting to people who know more than you, right? Which can be very intimidating. So you prepare yourself for the hard questions and the questions that may come from a very knowledgeable audience. So I can really appreciate. One thing I heard from you is that, your supervisor or manager at the time told you you're never going to make it to a supervisory role. And you took the emotions with it, but you didn't just negate the feedback, right? You used that and said, okay, what do you see that I need to work on? Right. So you didn't just get upset and emotional and say, okay, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but you allowed him to direct you into, okay, what do I need to work on? What can I do better? What gaps do you see? And I think that's really, really great, because I think sometimes we do get caught up in the emotion of it and just completely negate the feedback when there may be valuable feedback. There may be real things that won't preclude us from getting to the next level, but can certainly be challenges or barriers that, if we can address proactively, we kind of limit that from limiting us to the next level. And I appreciate that, because I think so oftentimes diverse candidates get caught up in the emotion, but don't appreciate the gift of the feedback, oftentimes because it doesn't come in a way that we can really accept, but there is a gift or a nugget there. And I think that's really, really good advice for diverse candidates, corporate business leaders who are looking to ascend the role and are often getting feedback that they don't necessarily appreciate or even align with. One thing I appreciate about you is you are literally one of the most long-standing diverse corporate leaders. In other words, there are several diverse corporate leaders in Central Indiana and Indiana corporations, but oftentimes they're in that role for 2 or 3 years and then they move on to the next company, or, shifts happen, mergers happen, acquisitions, et cetera. You've been in this role for quite a long time. And so that, in my view, gives you a very unique vantage point in how diversity, equity, and inclusion, its acceptance, its implementation has really occurred in the Indiana setting over the course of years. In other words, this isn't new. We've been talking about this for many, many years, but you're probably one of the few leaders who sat in your position long enough to see the kind of transition. So I'd like to know, from that vantage point, what have you seen have been areas where Indiana has really stepped up and made great transitions and great changes, and where we're still kind of struggling and need to step up, particularly as we compare ourselves to sister cities who are all competing for top talent, top diverse talent, and recruiting that talent to their city and keeping them in their city.
Yeah. You bring up some really good points, and that's a great question. I think, for our community, I think we're still evolving, I would say, as a community. I think we are competing against Atlanta, against Chicago, against some other communities. And we need to continue to try to be even more welcoming to Black members in our community and other minorities. And I think in the most recent years, especially with the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, there has been an increase in terms of desire. I think you've seen individuals who were standing quietly on the sidelines are now beginning to step into the limelight. For me personally, I'd like to thank my board who actually selected me to become the 10th president and CEO of Citizens Energy Group. They had that faith, they had that confidence in me. So thank you to them. And then I think from there, as a Black CEO, I see that we're trying to grow right now, and we'll talk about that hopefully in just a bit as a community. There again is I think I've seen the strongest desire that I've ever seen since I've been here. Back in the early 90s, I've seen the strongest desire for true change and improvement in terms of leadership. I think we're starting to delve into more data and information and understanding the Black community more and other minorities. I think that push is, I think our greatest success for a push is now. And there are some things that I think we're doing as a community that are helping us improve. And I think every community is on a spectrum, and every community is on a spectrum, every company is on a spectrum,
right.
And we've got to come to grips with wherever we are on that spectrum, with the sole purpose of wherever we are on that spectrum, trying to improve. And so that's something that when I hear others talk about where they are from a community standpoint, we had Louisville come in, the greater Louisville community come in and ask us questions about how we were performing so well. Well, we don't think we're performing that well, but again, from a spectrum standpoint, on that spectrum again, they believe that we're further ahead on that spectrum than they are. And so, again, I think we need to continue to perform as a community and improve there. And I think we are. I think we are in the process of improving right now.
Yeah. So as a Black CEO, how have you personally navigated your own authenticity when you're on a platform? All eyes are on you. Mm-hmm. You're calling the shots, but still being true to those values that your dad laid in you, literally back in the day, making sure that your corporate stances align with your personal values. How do you continue to make sure that those things stand in alignment when I'm sure there are pressures from every side to, drive business, generate revenue, all the things that corporations are made of, but still do so in a way that rings true for your employees, the people who work with you, the people who work for you, and the community who looks up to you.
Right. I think, there it's really you're grounded in who you are. Yeah. And you bring up my mother, bring up my father, and they helped ground me. And I've got extended family members as well, my sisters, who also helped ground me. And so being transparent, being honest, being open, being genuine. I can present to my board in a boardroom, which will happen here next week. And at the same time, I can go out in the community and sit down at the YMCA and have a conversation with someone who has no idea who I am, and just sit and talk and have coffee. And I think that comes from my upbringing and working on crews with my father. And I think, again, that's what meeting people where they are is what we all want. Sure. And so where are you, I don't want to talk over someone. I don't want to talk under someone at times. And so even with our employees, listening to what they need is something that is important. And right now, again, going back to our prior topic, all of our employees, and I've talked with other leaders as well, all of our employees are looking for us to improve as an organization. I'd say as organizations, we're seeing this very tough job market right now with the Great Resignation and employees jumping companies left and right from their living room and making 2 times their current income and not even getting out of their office chair in their home. And I think from that standpoint, we have to listen again now. But I think that as well is something that I've done in trying to listen to our employees, and we're hearing that from our employees today. That resonates and connects with me as well, with respect to what I think is right for the community. And there are a lot of pressures, but ultimately it comes down to what we think is right, what's right for our community, and then making decisions based on that. And we do that every day at Citizens. One of our core values at Citizens is in fact diversity. And so this is a core value that was championed even before me. I had a great predecessor in this respect, who happened to be a white man who championed diversity and just laid some great foundation at the organization that I could then step into and then just continue with even today.
So Jeff, as you talk about how you've been able to listen to your employees, how has their influence influenced you and your own personal experiences to continue to elevate D&I practices at Citizens? So based on that foundation that your predecessor has laid and what you've continued to do, can you speak to us about what specific initiatives or programs that Citizens has implemented to ensure that, not only their workplace employees and their culture are open and inclusive, but also to ensure that underserved and marginalized communities in the greater Central Indiana and Indianapolis geographic area have equitable and fair access to utility service,
Sure.
which is also, of concern.
It is. And first and foremost, from an employee standpoint, we focus on hiring, first and foremost, hiring and promotion. So that's where it all starts. And so we're looking to make sure that, again, our goal is to mirror the community completely. And when we talk about diversity, we talk about diversity in the purest sense of the word. That's racial diversity, gender diversity, just geographic diversity. Where are you from?
Sure.
Thought diversity, really, truly in the truest sense of the word. And so we really try to bring in individuals that are truly diverse, with a goal again of trying to mirror our community. Once they're in our organization, then there's a lot of training that takes place. And so when you're a brand new employee coming in, you get initial diversity training as part of the volley of online and in-person training that you have, online more so now and during this virtual hybrid environment. But that's another portion. And then once you're here and you've got that, then we're also looking to then reach out in the community and volunteerism. And so we ask our employees to volunteer. One of my favorite volunteer days is our Sharing the Dream to honor the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so that's where we go out in the community 9 times out of 10 into a park that has been underappreciated over the past years, and we look to refurbish that park. Again, looking at parks as community assets to those typically, again, low-income neighborhoods where young people can come and play basketball and learn and grow and see their friends and swim and do the things I think that again some of these low-income communities need, absent again some injection of some assistance and help. Then we also look at other community investment through philanthropy. So we're looking to help understand how we can improve our community with our philanthropy dollars. And so trying to grow there. With supplier diversity, we're also looking at how we can also look from the business side of the equation and looking at how we can improve our minority spend. So we have goals at Citizens, 15%, 18%, and 3% for minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses, trying to improve, again, those individuals in those categories in terms of their participation with Citizens Energy Group. And then finally, you talked about those that are less fortunate, those that are living in poverty. And I believe, we have in Central Indiana here a number around 200,000 people or so living at or below the level of poverty, the federal level of poverty. And if we were to put all those people in together, they would be the second largest, I believe, city in the state of Indiana.
Wow.
So we have a large population right here. And so we're looking at trying to help them with respect to discounts on their bill. We have our Warm Heart, Warm Home Foundation, where those low-income individuals can apply and receive funds for assistance with their bills as well, and a lot more low-income programs. We were the first in the state, I believe, on the water side to provide a low-income customer assistance program to help, again, low-income customers pay their bills. We understand that our utilities are critical utility infrastructure, water, wastewater, natural gas, and we understand that the role that we play. And so we want to make sure that all of our customers have access one way or another.
That's excellent. It's heartening to know that, we have someone at your level that has that kind of laser focus on the community and the needs of the community. That's very important. So I'd like to go back. The Freedom Forum would like to send out recognition and appreciation to our Latinx and Hispanic communities across Indiana as we celebrate their contributions to our community and corporate cultures during this 2022 Hispanic Heritage Month. Now, let's take a quick break.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
To go back and visit your experience again in the C-suite as a corporate leader in a position that most of us will never have the opportunity to really sit in. And in that role, I would expect that you often have a lot of opportunities to talk with other major leaders in the city or the state about, economic development, how the city or Indiana as a state can, continue to drive investment for economic gains. But as we do that, I expect that diversity, equity, and inclusion are major drivers of some of those conversations. And so what I would ask you is, as you speak to other corporate leaders who may or may not be diverse, what do you hear, amongst those leaders about the challenges that they're facing in really implementing DE&I practices in some of our Hoosier businesses in a way that really does make a difference? In other words, certainly as diverse people, I think we have just some inherency that goes with our belief and support of DE&I practices. But I fully recognize that is not everybody's vantage point. That's not everybody's stance. And I also believe that also drives some hesitation and resistance to truly getting actionable around some of these topics and issues. So as you have some conversations with other corporate leaders who are in a position to implement DE&I practice, but just haven't completely been sold, aren't convinced, or just resistant, what are those conversations? How do you help influence them to persuade them that this is the way of the future, that Indiana's growth and continued economic stability and sustainability is tied, at least in a portion, to how we do and successfully do diversity, equity, inclusion with regard to recruitment, retention, advancement, et cetera.
Right. And in having those conversations, I'll add one more, and I refer to it as JEDI, so justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So it's more than just our businesses. We have to also, I think, be involved in the justice side of things. And we can only do so much, I think, as business leaders, but we have to be paying attention there as well. But I think, I'll go back to the procurement element, and that's one where, with some, you'll hear concerns about a Black business or minority business charging more or not being able to perform the best work. And so, looking at our performance there, I use that as an example of how that just isn't true. Right. I can share with you and put you in contact with our procurement leaders on how we go about involving our diverse businesses. And I'll admit, again, we're on that spectrum, as I talked about earlier. We're not perfect, but we're definitely trying to make sure that we improve from our current position. And so, this includes things like mentoring some smaller business. And so they may start out at a very small level, and they may need to grow. There may be some small failures there. And so rather than letting them go, instead, let's continue to mentor that small business, and let's give them let's give them some constructive feedback, as we talked about earlier, and see how they respond. Sure. And then if they respond well, let's award them another a larger project and continue to move there. And there's one company in particular. I met their CEO, minority gentleman, who walked up to me at a speaking engagement and just thanked me for having faith, and thanked Citizens Energy Group for having faith in his organization. And I responded to him, look, I know our program, so I not only have faith in you, you've proven to our team
Right.
that you can perform this work. Now, I don't know the details. I don't need to, but the fact that you've been
Right.
with us for 3 years tells a story to me that you've grown and that we've grown with you. And so I think that's one fallacy that exists. That again, some of these minority businesses need a change, and they may need to be handled a little bit differently. So another example would be they may need a 2 or 3 year agreement rather than a 1 to again be able to pay back a loan for equipment or those types of things. It'll need to extend over a number of years. That's one element, and then I think there are also those individuals who just quite honestly don't understand. Again, the various markets around how to hire some of these minority candidates, and again, we're trying to improve that. So part of it, quite honestly, is about education.
Sure.
And so there's a huge effort now around trying to educate some businesses on what to do. And so we're looking at getting some programs in place, and then allowing companies to sign up and learn and grow with those programs as well.
So on my last podcast episode, I spoke with Rafael Sanchez, who talked a bit about corporate authenticity, the reality or that, certainly each of us as individuals, particularly diverse individuals in a corporate setting, have to have our own individual authenticity and feel valued and feel like we can be our full selves in our corporate environments. But he also talked about corporate authenticity, meaning the corporation also has to be authentic and has to recognize where they have had challenges in these areas, where they can improve, and having real conversations with their employees, their work culture, about their work culture, and the community about how that authenticity for their corporation has evolved. You mentioned earlier, it's kind of an evolution. So when you think about corporate authenticity with respect to citizens, how would you describe citizens' corporate authenticity? What is it that you as a company make sure that you convey? You mentioned that diversity is one of your core values. So how does that authenticity get conveyed internally and externally?
Yeah. I think for Citizens Energy Group, one of the things that we focus on, again, is really the community. We are very focused on our community and participation then in the community. So we're involved in a number of things. I indicated sharing the dream earlier in early January. There are a number of other events that we participate in Central Indiana to help our employees understand, and I think it conveys that we're here, we're providing critical services to our community, but we also need to volunteer and help those in our community, and that even travels down to each individual project that we might do. So I'll take a rock ramp project that was built near Riverside here just recently. There was a dam that failed there. We had a number of options that we wanted to effectuate to repair that dam. But instead of just looking inward, it was near a low-income neighborhood. We had a number of neighborhood meetings asking the neighbors themselves, what would you like to see? Now, we're not making any promises here,
Right.
but we want to make sure that we have your input so that when we come back with this structure that's going to meet our business need, we also want to see if there's a way that we can also meet a community need here as well. So from a corporate standpoint and talking about, again, authenticity, I think that's one of our focal points as Citizens Energy Group. We're constantly focused on our community. Even more so, again, given, as I stated earlier, our low-income customer base. Here we've got low-income customers. We also have businesses and other residents, but businesses who are competing sometimes locally, regionally, statewide, nationally, internationally. We also have to provide value to those organizations as well. And so having low-cost utilities is a North Star for us, because we need to understand that not only are we meeting the needs of low-income members in our community, but also looking at other businesses that are competing as well. When we go in to raise our rates, there's a huge process that's required to raise rates for utilities in the state of Indiana, and oftentimes there are community meetings where the community gets invited in. They get to sit in front of the regulatory body to understand and speak about about an upcoming rate increase for utility services. And I'm oftentimes I'll hear from a Black family or a Hispanic family or another minority family how they just cannot afford it. They cannot afford another dollar. And so it's very educational to again remind us, and staff attends as well.
Right.
Help remind us what our community is about. But I'd say that's what our organization is focused on, is truly our community. And again, we do that in a number of different ways other than providing utility services.
And since we're talking about community and has kind of shifted to that focus, I'd like to talk to you about some of the work you're doing in the communities. Particularly, I appreciate that you're the chair of the Business Equity for Indy, which is a collaborative initiative with several organizations, CICP, the Indy Chamber, and the Indianapolis Urban League. I'd like you to please explain to us what this initiative is about and how its members are working to support greater diversity, equity, and inclusion for all of Indiana businesses.
Yeah, so as you state, BEI is a joint effort between the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, the Indy Chamber, in collaboration with the Indianapolis Urban League. And as we talked about earlier, forming BEI was motivated again by those deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others. And really the business community was abuzz. There were a number of conversations by a number of individuals asking the simple question, what can or what should the business community do about this issue? How can we participate, as we talked about earlier, in improving our community? And again, there was a sense of urgency that was created, not only here, but we're seeing it again across America. And so with that sense of urgency, now there's a collection of approximately 150 Central Indiana business leaders coming together to form BEI with the mission to drive racial equity and economic opportunity across Central Indiana. And to guide our efforts, as I stated earlier, we're digging in demographic data and learning from the life experiences of Black people and Black residents. We've formed now 5 task forces to really drill down in these 5 focus areas. And thus far, we have a task force that's focused on hiring and promotion. We talked about that just a little earlier. A task force focused on procurement and participation. A 3rd task force focused on learning and talent. And then a 4th task force focused on impediments to health. And then finally, as we talked about earlier, that justice portion of this effort, a task force focused on public policy. And again, I think these organizations are collaborating to, again, try to improve the economic participation of all, not only Black people, but other peoples of color here in Central Indiana. And in so doing, we believe, again, that our community will be improved as we along that spectrum that I talked about earlier.
I think that's so necessary. And I appreciate that so many of our business leaders in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others felt the need to get active, right? And get actionable and really put thought around what influence they could hold in this city in order to help move us closer to where we'd like to be as a city and as a state. Now, I'd like to touch on this justice piece. You've mentioned justice, and I've had these conversations previously because I do think as much as we try to avoid it, and I certainly try to avoid it because the political landscape is real crazy to me right now. But there is this kind of public policy and justice piece that I do think has a DE&I lens, unquestionably. That isn't all about criminal justice necessarily, right? That there is a justice piece that is aligned with the business initiatives and the business side. And so when you talk about justice, you mentioned JEDI earlier with respect to citizens and business equity for Indy. What do you think about? What are some of the focuses for that public policy initiative that you all have at least discussed?
Sure. I think, just I'll say in general, I think from a public policy standpoint, we want to make sure that laws that are being discussed and legislation being discussed does not have a disparate impact on minorities in our community. And so I'd sum it up primarily that way. And there are some examples. Critical race theory. I think critical race theory has nothing to do. Teaching history has nothing to do. And I think 9 times out of 10, most can barely define critical. But here it came up again. I think as an issue in the legislature here just recently. Luckily, there's not been any action. Will it go away? I don't know. But that's something that again we will continue to monitor at BEI, and again, I think as individual organizations as well, to try to understand what impact that could have with respect to our community. And again, I think in that instance could push against any progress that could be made around justice in our community. But that's one example that I'll throw out as something that again, I think if it would have been effectuated, could have had a disparate impact.
Yeah.
I think on not only minority individuals in our community, but also the majority in terms of not understanding elements of our history that are relevant, that I think are relevant even today.
And Jeff, are you all having conversations not just about the disparate impact that, some of these legislative avenues can have on the minority or diverse populations here in the city or in the state, but also on recruiting minority and diverse talent to the state?
Absolutely. Those conversations are absolutely taking place as well. The laws and rules that we make here impact us across the country and internationally. And we've seen that happen historically.
Yeah.
And so we have to be mindful and understand, just take all of that into account and understand that again, we could be less inviting or more inviting.
Right.
And as we talked about earlier, I think from a minority standpoint, we've got some work to do.
Yeah.
And I think we're focused on that, I think today more than ever. But still have acknowledged that we have some work to do.
Yeah. So Jeff, as we wrap up, I'd like to ask you 2 closing questions. One, from your vantage point as a long-term diverse leader of a major utility in Indianapolis, what would you advise other corporate leaders in the city or state to do, begin doing, stop doing in order to progress DE&I in whatever capacity they can? And then finally, what tips or tools or resources would you suggest any Indiana leader who's serious about recruiting, hiring, retaining, or promoting diverse talent within their ranks to take or, again, stop doing if their goal is to advance DE&I for their organization?
Yeah, good questions. And, I think one of the things that we've done and I've done at Citizens and at our organization and would ask others to do is to do some future casting.
Yeah.
So envision a future where there is a more equitable environment for all participants and all members of our community to participate in the economic vitality of our society. What does that look like? And then begin to take steps backward to today to understand those actions that need to take place in order for that future to come to fruition. I think that's going to 9 times out of 10 involve collaboration, which is what BEI is all about.
Right.
Individually, each of us are doing and have programs in place to try to help improve in a number of different areas in the Black community, in the Hispanic or Latino community,
Sure.
Latinx community. We're all trying to improve, but what if we could pull ourselves together and be more synergistic around certain elements, around certain programs? That's what we're looking to do, and in some cases have done, and will continue. And I'll talk about an answer to your second question here in a moment. With BEI, and so those are 2 that I would say to start with. I think in terms of understanding some of the 2 to 3 tools or tips,
Sure.
I'd say start early.
Yeah.
There was some work done. I talked about data mining and delving into information. We have very few minorities to begin with, and the data shows that very few minorities matriculate through high school all the way through college and stay in our state. And so we're starting with an even smaller pool than we would like. And so trying to start early and reaching out to those individuals, high school, maybe even middle school, I think is something that we need to understand. And then also for corporate programs, and this is something that one of our teams is recommending, is look at some benefits that not only benefit employees that are working for us currently. So if I've got a minority custodian who wants to go back to school, I think that's a great program. Most companies do that. But an extension of that would then be, what can we do to help their children?
Right.
What should we do to help their children continue their education and grow? And so there might be some work around, I'd say we need to explore some benefits there, again, with respect to that second generation of the minority that we might be able to improve and help. Then I'd also ask corporations in Central Indiana to look at the Good Wages program, which is really a program that is targeting $18 an hour as the minimum wage within our organizations. And I think, again, that economic boost to families, regardless of their job within your organization, is going to go a long way. Again, now there's some other issues associated with that, but I think that will go a long way towards helping, again, improve our position along that spectrum that I talked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that's really great. So, Jeff, my final question for you, as going back to your electrical engineering days, your technical background, you've mentioned it a few times, but I just want to drive this point because I think there are so many DE&I initiatives in our current organizations that are not data driven. They are more kind of emotional. What do we think we can do, but not necessarily data driven. How important is it for data to drive the direction of your DE&I initiative? You've talked about data, you've said it a couple times, but I think that is a miss for a lot of organizations. So I'd just like for you to hearken on the importance of allowing the data to drive the decision making with regard to DE&I.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, I think it's the lens that from a business perspective, all business leaders, we look through that what gets measured gets managed.
Right.
And so I think measuring our progress is something that's paramount. So at PEI, we're looking at coming up with a scorecard that will do exactly that. So how do we know that year over year, or at least, every 2 years, that we didn't get here overnight, and so we won't solve this problem overnight. We understand that, but we still want to make sure that we're making incremental progress. And so I think data is extremely critical in understanding where we are currently and understanding what efforts, what actions then move us forward and move us along positively along that spectrum to improve ourselves. And so, again, I think the data that was presented, it's been a few months now regarding the pool of Black members here in our community is something that everyone needed to know. We need to understand what that looks like, and then now that we know what that looks like, now we can begin to address it. What can we do to increase those numbers? But until then, we just no one really knew. So data is incredibly important. I think it also then can be used to help our community understand what the businesses in the community are doing and the impact that they have or have not made. There will be successes, there will be failures.
Sure.
And we need to understand that and acknowledge it and accept it. But with the idea of learning from our failures and trying to improve again and moving positively along that spectrum. But to your point, data is critical. I think that's the new element that the Business Equity for Indy initiative is bringing to this problem, and solving it again using data.
Well, Jeff, we thank you so much for your time, coming by the studio and dropping some nuggets of wisdom on us. Again, from a very unique vantage point as one of the long-term executives, CEOs in a major utility here in the state. We thank you for your time. Thank you for stopping by the 14th episode of the Freedom Forum. Good to have you.
Thank you again. I appreciate it very much. Thanks, Angela.
Absolutely. Thank you again to Jeff Harrison, and thanks to you for joining us on this 14th episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Please come back next month for another conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Central Indiana business community.